I'm making this scissors case today. It's bright and joyful and a perfect place to store my scissors. If you've already made a pincushion with me and a needle book with me, come and make this scissors case to complete your set. I'll show you how to make your own pattern, but there's also 2 templates available for free. All you need is some felt, fabric, and thread. Let's get started. So this pair of gold embroidery scissors came with this leather case, and it's really handy, especially when I'm taking stitching on the go. So I want to make one for my other pair of scissors. This pair of scissors is also very handy. They're a little bit bigger than these ones, and I'd like to have a case for these as well. So I'm going to use this case as my template to make my slow stitching case. So I'm going to bring out a piece of paper and I'm going to trace this onto the paper. So this is going to be my rough guide. I'm going to add about 1 centimeter around all the sides, and that's because the one I'm going to be making will be slightly bigger all around. So I'm going to cut this out, giving myself some extra allowance. So here's my template that's just a little bigger all around than my case, and this doesn't have to be perfect or precise. If you want your template to be symmetrical, you can fold the piece you've cut out in half and choose which side you think is better, and then trace the one side that you like, and then trace it on the other side. So that's what I've done here. I'm going to cut that out and use that as my template so it's more symmetrical. I do have a pattern piece for this, actually 2. They're available on my website. So this is the size I'm making today, and this is the smaller size that would work for embroidery scissors. So if you hop over to my website, you can pick up these pattern pieces and use the code SCISSORS to receive the pattern for free. So I have cut out 2 pieces of felt. I'm using pink felt. You could use any color. Just thought it would be fun to use a colored felt for this because when it's sewn together, some of the edges of the felt are most likely going to show through. So I thought it would be fun if it was a color. So now that I have my 2 pieces of felt, I'm going to build collages on them. So I've made a collage on each piece. This one is a little more detailed, more pieces than this piece. So they're both ready to go. And now what I'm going to do is baste them in place. I'm going to use sewing thread for that. And any color is fine because I'm going to take it out. I'm going to use green today, but you could use any color. And this is going to hold the pieces in place so I can slow stitch. So there is all of the thread work basting down the collage. So I'm going to start with this one. And I'm using colors that are going to be the same for each one. So I have a red, a pink, sort of golden yellow, a light green, and a really pale turquoisey blue. So I'm going to use that on both pieces. I'm going to start by stitching along the edges of my pieces, and that's going to secure each piece down and join them to each other. So now that I've stitched down the small amount of patchwork on this one and tucked the corners around on this tiny piece, I have this larger piece that I need to secure down before I can take out the basting stitches. If I took them out now, this bottom part would be fine, but this part's only secured with the basting stitches. So I'm taking red and I'm going to go around in the red area and put some stitches in, and that's going to secure this piece down. And then I'm going to be able to take out my basting stitches. So I'm just going to come up and make these red stitches. I'm going to follow the shape of the design. And this is as an alternative to securing a piece with the straight stitches. Because this is such a large piece, stitching this way is going to be the best way to secure everything down. You can see I'm right at the edge here, so I'm going to turn and go back and continue around this other circular shape. I'm just going to do that all the way up and down the piece. So now that I've gone around the red areas with red embroidery floss, all my pieces are secure. I can take out my basting stitches. So I take the back of a needle, not the sharp end, but where the eye of the needle is, and I just start to pull. And sometimes it's a little bit tight because of the stitching I've done on the front, and so I can always snip with scissors to help release that. So all the basting is out from the top now, and then I'd used a second piece here, so I'll just do the same thing. I'm going to pull, I'm going to find where my end is and start pulling everything out. Well, this has gotten a little twisted here, so this is going to be a good place to come in with my scissors and make a few snips. So now I'm going to have more than one piece. I can start to pull. So that's all of my basting stitches out, and everything's secured now. So any stitching I do now is just to enhance the design. It's going to be decoration. There's nothing functional left on this one side. And I can do the same thing on this side. I've started with some stitching here and around here, and I'll just continue to make some stitches at the edges of every piece of fabric. And it may help for me to come in and do some trimming so that when I'm stitching, I know the size of my piece. See, that makes a difference. And then at the tip, I'm going to fold over the fabric and stitch it. So I'm going to leave all of my basting stitches in until everything is secured. So I've used straight stitches to secure all my patchwork pieces down. I've removed my basting stitches, and so now I'm ready to do slow stitching over the entire piece. I'm going to use white pearl cotton number 8. Adding slow stitching lines in white is really going to unify this piece. So on this piece, I've done straight stitching back and forth in the white. And that's a really nice effect, especially over this more complicated patchwork. It's simple and it unifies it. On this piece, I've started doing blanket stitch. So I've come up just through this part. There's still some more I can do down here if I choose to, and I'm continuing and moving across here. So I come up from my last row. I go up and I'm holding my thread to the left. It's long like this, it can get tangled. I just bring it and it comes through and creates a loop. So it's over here now. I'm coming up, and so it's coming up inside the circle that's created with my stitch. So you can make these closer together, farther apart. You can make them taller. I could come in here and come way up here and make a really tall stitch. I could also come in way down here and make a short stitch. So it's very forgiving in terms of precision, that really no matter what you do, it's going to look nice. It's going to look different, and you could play around and experiment with this blanket stitch. It really is a great stitch to do as an alternate to the running stitch for slow stitching. And it just gives a beautiful mosaic-like effect over top of your fabric. So I'm going to continue here with these stitches, and I'm going to go all the way to the top with this. So I've completed the stitching on both of these pieces. Blanket stitch on this one, running stitch, and coming back in the other direction, making some cross signs here. So I'm going to come in with some thread and I'm going to stitch down the sides. And this isn't necessary if you really want raw edges to be on your piece, then you don't have to do this step. And this is the step before adding a lining. Now for a lining, you could use fabric or felt. I've decided to use felt in a different color, and so I've cut out, using my template, these pieces. And so what I could do now is just stitch on this lining. These edges would still be raw, and then when both of these pieces have their lining on and I stitch them together, then these edges would be raw and they would be frayed. And that's a really nice look as well. But I'd like to, in this case, just take this extra step. I'm going to use a matching pink floss and just go around and do some stitching to just bend in the edges a little bit. There's still going to be raw edges, but it's just going to pull in the edges of this fabric a little bit. So I'm using a whip stitch and just going around and tucking the edges with my finger and stitching all those edges. So I've stitched the edge on this one and it's tucked under the fabric. You can see the difference that it makes. It gives it a bit of shape and it cleans it up just a little bit. So now I'm going to do the same with this one. So I've done a whip stitch around both pieces. You can see that there's a lot of knots and threads on the back, and that's why I want to line this piece. So when my scissors go in, they're not going to snag or poke on any of these. So I've used the pattern piece and cut out two pieces in this golden yellow color, and I cut them just slightly smaller, almost exactly the same size, just a tiny bit smaller. So now I'm going to stitch them on. So for this, you could use any color thread. I've decided I'm going to match the inside, and I'm going to connect this lining piece. So I'm going to come in, my thread is knotted, tuck my knot in, and then stitch this on. Now you could use a running stitch, you could use a whip stitch and come into the edge here, like this. If you feel like it's gonna be moving around, you could always pin this in place. I find a lot of times with felt, it sticks to itself. So this felt is sticking to this felt, and so it's not really shifting too much, but I'm going to pay attention as I go that I don't pull as I'm going to pull it away from the other edge. I'm just going to be mindful of where the piece is and mindful of how tightly I pull these stitches. I want them to be tight enough so that they're going to stay and hold this in place, but not so tight that they're gonna unduly pull the felt away. I'm gonna work my way around here. So I've come to the end all the way around, stitching this golden yellow felt on. So there's my very last stitch done. So what I'm gonna do is push my needle through to the middle here and pop it out. Give it a little tug on it, but not too tightly. Then I'm going to take a small stitch, make a little knot. Then I'm going to go in just under this layer, not coming through. Pull that in, and I'm going to go back the other way and then snip off my thread. This feels really puffy and soft now, really nice. So I'm going to take this piece and do the same thing. So because I had gone around and with my pink thread and stitched down, sort of tucked under the edges of my fabric, it's making it really easy for me now to stitch this on. It's a really nice rounded edge, and even though there's some bits of fabric sticking up, there's some raw edges that I can see. It's just making this process really easy. I know exactly where to come out. I can feel where the edge is. So it makes this process really easy. So both pieces are complete. The final step is just to stitch it together. I'm going to use white pearl cotton again to stitch the edges together, but I could use regular embroidery floss, and any color would work. I could use pink, I could use red, I could use the golden brown. So what I'm going to have to consider is where to start. I don't want to start too high because I want to give my scissors lots of room to fit in. And these ones are fairly wide at the sides. So instead of starting too high, I'm going to start about right here and work my way around. I can always move it up a bit if I think I need to, but I think it's a safer bet to start lower down. So I'm going to hold these two pieces together, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to do a blanket stitch. Going to tuck my knot in, and I'm going to take a stitch all the way through to the back. And now I can start my blanket stitch. I'm going to pay attention to make sure that I don't misalign these pieces. I can just keep checking and looking at them as I go. It's my left hand, in my case, to keep track of the thread and hold it to the side. Going through a lot of layers, it's fairly thick. I'm just going to go slowly. I've got these gripping thimbles on and this piece of flex tape a little lower down on this hand because that's often a spot where my needle will push. So the flex tape, sometimes you can find it as medical tape. This is from a hardware store, and you just cut a piece and wrap it around your finger, and it lasts quite a while before you need a new piece. So that's going to help because it's a bit stiff, because there are a lot of thick layers here with all this felt. So I'm going to work my way around here. You could always use some clips and clip your piece together if it seemed like that would help with your stitching, like this. I don't know if it's really necessary here, but it certainly doesn't hurt to have the piece clipped. So now I'm just going to work my way around with this blanket stitch. So I'm near the end of this piece of thread, so I'm going to need a new one. So first I'm going to take off my thimbles, because it makes it a little bit easier to tie off. And all I'm going to do is, this was my last stitch, I'm going to anchor that stitch so So there's my last stitch, and I'm going to tie off inside, right near the edge. And then I'm going to take my thread and just push it through to kind of pull that, tighten that knot. And I'll show you how I get a new piece of thread and continue on. So I have a new piece on my needle, and I will come in to anchor that thread. So that thread's now connected. And then I'm going to come up right where my last stitch is, where those 2 bars are in between. So now I've just extended that thread. So it's just where the last thread would have been. And then I can keep on stitching. I can just take my new stitch, hold this thread to the side, and I can carry on. I'm near the end. I started here, went around, and now I'm here. And one thing that might be a good idea here is to do some reinforcing stitches at the beginning and the end. Now I didn't do that over here, so I can go back and do that still. So I think this is about as high as I want to go here. Let me just double check here and see. Here's where I started on this piece. So I think I'll just take one more stitch and then I'll be fairly parallel to where I started. Of course, this opening doesn't have to be perfect. No one's going to notice. I just get as close as I can to it opening right at the same point. That's about right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these blanket stitches here beside or right on top of each other, just to reinforce this opening place where there could be some stress. Okay, I think that's fairly good. So I'm going to knot off, and I'll come back and do that, make it a little stronger on this side. And I'm going to come back on this side, and I'll take some blanket stitches close together here. That's good. I'll knot off here. So here it is stitched together. It's so pillowy and soft. Let's put those scissors in. Nice. This was a really nice, quick project. I only needed a few scraps and some felt. So now I have my scissors case, my needle book, and my pin cushion, all created with slow stitching. This was such a fun project. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, happy stitching.